Hello, 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 everyone. I am Rosalind Brown with Your Wealth Guidance, where we help Black women create their financial independence roadmap so you can live your life on your own terms. I always talk about building your team, and I don't care where you are with your business, with your life. Build your team before you have the money. Build your team before you have the big names and before something happens. Like, you don't want to be in a situation where something finally happens and you're like calling around and you're going to talk to the first attorney who answers the phone or the first one that has an appointment. And so we have a group of attorneys here with us today, and we're going to go through a few different items. And so everything from the establishing to executing your overall business plan to elevating and growing your business, and then making sure that what you're creating is going to be available for the next generation as well. So, a real full-fledged, full picture in terms of what you need from a legal aspect. Definitely drop your comments, your thoughts, your questions in the chat. Let us know where you are in your business planning, in your questions about growing to elevate. If you're starting a business or thinking about starting a business, let us know. And so we'll start off with a little bit of an intro. So, Nakia, you want to give us a start? Tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Sure. My name is Nakia. That's my full legal name. If you ever see me on socials, it's probably just going to say Nakia Esquire or Nakia NLN for no last name. I'm licensed to practice law in North Carolina. And of course, these are my partners here. They'll introduce themselves later, but we are the founding partners of Sage House Legal, LLP. I practice contracts law, generally speaking, business contracts. And that includes employment contracts, independent contractor agreements, vendor agreements, the whole shebang, until it gets to Nicole's part where she's getting into the IP part. She's the resident, not guru, sage. We're going to say sage when it comes to the IP part.
Perfect. And that's a great segue to Nicole. And so, of course, Nikia's getting you started. You got a couple of contracts here or there, and now you are growing and you're like, people know me. People know me in these streets. And then Nicole comes in to make sure that they don't mistakenly know you, but do business with someone else.
Exactly. So my name is Nicole Gaither. I am from New Orleans, Louisiana. I'm licensed in Louisiana and I practice trademark and copyright law. So I focus on making sure that the brand that you are building is something that can be protected. And we are, that's through registration, also enforcing your rights. I also work with you to protect your creative content so you can make sure that the courses that you're creating, the training manuals, artwork, photographs are protected as well. So we go from that part of registration and I could like to call it going beyond the R in both cases, because not only are we doing that registration piece, but we are doing it because we are working toward a bigger goal of making money from all that hard work that you have done. So, that could possibly be licensing the products and services that you offer, like licensing your photos, artwork, also product placement. Had a couple of clients. Oh, sorry. Wait, someone's writing. Okay. I saw the comment. I was like, wait, I'm not ready.
Let us
know. So, if you, I had one client who was approached by a very popular TV show on Bravo to have her products placed on the show. So, these are things that, of course, all these companies are going to make sure if they're working with you that you own what you are doing and that they're not going to be on the other end of a lawsuit because of you. So the name of the game this year is making money.
I would love that. And that's something you don't even think about. Someone reaches out to you, you're like, here go my, whatever it is that I create, place that on whatever reality show. And you're like, wait, what steps do I need to take? And it's always, you don't know what you don't know, which is big too. And to round things out, Sabrina, you want to tell us a little bit about your specialty?
Sure. So my name is Sabrina Gibson. I am licensed in California. I currently live in Nevada, but I'm licensed in California. I do predominantly estate and tax planning. So estate planning covering what you want to do with your business should something happen to you while you're alive. Let's say you fall into a coma, you become incapacitated for some reason, you're unable to make decisions. It's planning for your personal affairs, your financial affairs, and so oftentimes your business, if you're a small business owner, during that period of time, and then also after you've passed away, which could be business succession as well as passing of assets to the next generation. And then I also do some strategic tax planning. I'm completing an advanced degree in taxation so that I can help with, the real minutia of that tax planning that goes into business structure sometimes, but then also succession, and then also just overall estate planning and wealth transfers. So that's where I come in, kind of like protecting everything we've built and trying to keep it within our family and our communities and passing it to the next generation.
I love it. It's almost full circle. So
Yeah.
Nakia, as you're getting the business started, and maybe it's like, I'm put my toe in the water and see if I can make some money doing this. And it's when, maybe you're getting your side hustle together. And you're like, can I make this a business? Am I going to make some money with this? Hey, Tyra. And then, Nicole's, once you have made some money and you're like, people like this. People come back to me in order to purchase this good, this service. They know me. And so then you have established something you definitely want to protect. And then Sabrina is coming in to say, wait, this is a legacy. And how do I actually make this a legacy? So it's really full-fledged. And so I'll start with you, Nakia, especially when we start to think about these side hustles. So oftentimes people are doing just a little something. So they're working their 9 to 5 and someone says, you're really good at X. So it could be, they're really good at hair, they're a good DJ, whatever it is. And they're just like, oh, okay, cash at me. It's cool. I come do that. What are some things that they should be concerned about when they start doing 1 or 2 things? They're getting a little business here or there. Maybe it's not consistent in terms of contracts, in terms of protections. Mm-hmm. And when should they make that switch between, sure, I can do your project. I can do this one thing. I, develop websites or whatever that is, to actually a true formation of a business.
Well, so the first thing is be careful with that Cash App. Be careful. Do keep in mind that if you're providing services to somebody and they're actually paying you for it, there's basically a cap that you can get away with without having to then claim that on your taxes. So if you're doing it, every once in a while, literally, and only getting a piece of change, occasionally it might
like cakes at Christmas or something.
Exactly. It might not be an issue, but if you hit that cap, if you hit that threshold, you are basically, it may be a hobby business as far as the IRS is concerned. There are other, terms that they might use, but you are a business, you're self-employed already because you're making money off of those services. So watch out. Just because you're doing it through Cash App does not mean that you're not going to end up having to pay some taxes on that. In terms of contracts, I just encourage everybody to remember that paper trail is important for pretty much everything that you do in business. When you start a business, you register it with the Secretary of State, you get that certificate of authority of authorization that has your name on it and tells you can do X, Y, and Z. Same thing with your trademark registration. It tells you own it. Contracts are like the foundation of running a business. If you don't have your contracts in writing, do you even have a contract? Are you even contracting? What happens on the other end of that relationship when someone says that you didn't do what you were supposed to do? And I oftentimes hear people say, oh, well, I decided I wasn't going to worry about contracts. It's low liability business, X, Y, and Z. And it I kind of cringe a little bit inside, because what does that even mean? because unless you have a contract that's limiting your liability, you're if you cause any sort of harm to the other person or anything goes sideways, you may be liable for a whole lot more than the contract price. You might have only been charging this person $50 to do this or $500 to do this, but that does not mean that if something goes wrong, you're only liable for $50 or $500. So there's just so much that you can and should do with your contracts, and you have to start somewhere. A handshake and a smile is not going to protect you. It's not going to help you if anything happens and you have to prove to a court, prove to an arbitrator, prove to someone, prove to the IRS or whoever that these were the terms and conditions of this agreement. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it written? Because he said, she said does not help you, especially if you are the service provider. There's this written. I know I'm talking a long time, but I'll share this one other thing. There's this general rule in business law, contracts law, drafting party rule. If you are the service provider, it is your right and your responsibility to create a contract that's basically going to be interpreted in your favor. If you don't have it in writing, how are you going to go after your client or your customer or the person on the other end of the contract? Because you have the burden of proving what your contract was. So I strongly encourage people to prioritize the paper trail for everything that you're doing in business. Paper, from the registration all the way through to business succession plan, to your estate plan. Put it in paper, put it in writing, so that there aren't any real questions about what your intentions were and where your rights and your responsibilities lie.
And I think that's a good point, because especially as you're just getting started, oftentimes you're getting started, you're doing some projects, you're doing something here, there, and you're like, well, do I want to go ahead and, do something big? Do I want to put a big contract in place? And so you might have to have something that's general that covers every time you do X, Y, or Z. But I think that's even a good transition to talk with Nicole, because I think we get started with one project. We get started and we get contracted because we're good at something. And so people see you're good at X, so I'm going to hire you. And so you do it with a handshake and a smile, and the kid is like, don't do that. No. But then that person is like, she is really good at this. And you start doing it more and more. And so you become, Rosalind who does X. And you're like, well, maybe I should come up with a name. I'm going to put something on Instagram. But you haven't really protected whatever it is. So regardless if that's, you prepare taxes or you do hair or, you do nails, whatever it might be. And now people like, oh, she do the best nails in the neighborhood. She is booked solid for 2-3 weeks. And you got the nicest name, Rosalind does nails or whatever it is. And now somebody named Kim got my Rosalind does nails name.
Right.
And so when do you make the transition to say, okay, I made a little bit of money, people know me. When should I protect my name, my intellectual property? When does that make sense?
That should be even before you get into business, because you want to make sure if you're doing business and it's not going to be under your own name, that the name that you're picking to do business is available for you to use and it's not someone else's name, which means that, trademark law was actually set up to protect consumers. So it was to help consumers be able to figure out where they got products and services so they wouldn't be confused in the marketplace and sitting there in a grocery store trying to figure out which bunny bread is supposed to be the one that they're buying versus like the bunny bread that has like, Roger Rabbit on it or something like that. I'm making this up very much. Like you'll sometimes see this with like companies that are, that start off in a city. Like for example, you're going to see a whole bunch of NOLA blank and NOLA that, because it's just easier, but they want to be like, oh, well, we're, based in New Orleans. Okay. That is not a good name to use. Like there's no reason why you need to be using NOLA, like be unique, because you have to also consider what's the end goal for you. Like, what's your plan once you set up this business? Are you trying to franchise later? Are you going to be hiring employees? Like, are you trying to be a big conglomerate? Like, would you consider selling? Are you going to appear on Shark Tank? Like, all these options are available, but if you pick a name that is weak, not available, infringing on somebody else's brand, you are already starting off on the wrong foot. So even though there are a lot, like, I am one of these people who says, like, you need to start protecting things as soon as you come up with the idea. However, I know that also involves money. And the main thing that I try to express to my clients is, if you do not have the money for registration and you had to scrimp and save to get it, I'm going to tell you, this is probably not the time for you to move forward with it, because if we need to enforce your rights, you might not be able to afford that. So, you have to consider when the time is best for you to be able to set aside the money that you need to take those steps, and to also make sure that you're protecting the brand or the content or whatever it is that you're putting together and offering to the world. But at the very minimum, when you are first starting out, at least do a search, like have an attorney do a comprehensive trademark search to make sure that the name that you want to use is available for use and registration down the line, and possibly growth. Because if you are selling one thing, maybe you want to expand product lines, you also make sure that you don't have to set up a whole separate business for that. So like, even if you decide you're not going to go to an attorney, the couple of places to look and to do a search, of course, doing internet searches and see if the name is in use. And even if it is, it might not necessarily mean that you can't use it. It just means that you need to dig in a little bit further to see, like, what's this person selling? Is it going to be something that's going to be similar to what I'm offering? Also, the USPTO search program is for free. It's available. It's a little nuanced on how you do the searches, but it's at least somewhere to start so that you can start knocking out names that you might have picked out. And then lastly, I always say, go look and see what's on Instagram, like who has a name taken on Instagram or Facebook. Then that's probably going to tell you it might not be available for what you want to use it for.
Or maybe they didn't do anything either. So you can be like, all right, they do their job, so now I can jump in here and use it.
and like, of course, you have to be careful with that, because they might not have that internet presence, but they might still be in business. So the question is, are you going to be competing with them? Are you all in the same location? Or is it you both are on, have e-commerce sites, and, maybe this person is setting up a brick and mortar. I mean, there's so many, little things that are involved in that. So it's not necessarily a straightforward thing. And of course, like the one thing I emphasize is picking a strong name. Like I was just alluding to, like, don't pick something that's like best shoes or, best footwear. Like, that's not telling me anything. That is just saying that you sell what you think are the best shoes out there. Make me guess what you sell. Like, you don't have to tell me what you sell. Like, I want to guess what you sell.
Like, it shouldn't be descriptive.
Exactly.
Descriptive is not the goal. And I think it's
Right.
I know, because I'm not the IP person. So I always come to Nicole like, is this a great idea? She's like, girl, no. So the 99% of the time, it's because we automatically revert to describing something, like the product, our service, ourselves. And that's like the worst option. Don't try to be descriptive. Try to be something unique, novel. Think of something else. Like, think of Apple computers. What does an Apple have to do with that Mac? I don't know.
And Google.
Random,
arbitrary,
exactly.
something that's going to make you unique and memorable. Otherwise, does it even function as a trademark? Is it really a trademark if it's just describing what you do?
So to never start describing
too, because I mean, when you think about Apple, like, who would have thought to name a company Apple? And it's like, so could I be banana? Like, is it?
You could, but
you can't sell bananas. But you can be bananas.
Don't sell apples either. However, Apple seems to now think that they own fruit everywhere. So there was a company that I think and this is because I cannot remember exactly the whole story, because it was like a couple of years ago. There was a company that either named their products Pear, and they weren't selling computers or anything like that. But I think their logo was actually the shape of a pear with a bite through it. And Apple went after them because they were like,
Right.
well, we have an apple with a bite in it, and like you have a pear. That's, no, you can't do that. So yeah, just don't have the, the bite.
And I think that's one thing too, is the whole fighting, because some of these large brands will come after you and you're like, no, I'm banana. Like I'm not apple. Like, why are you bothering me?
Yeah.
And how do you have the documentation to fight that without going broke? I think especially for a small business.
And that's unfortunately the thing that happens a lot. Like there was a company that I think they sell like towels and bedding in San Francisco, and this other company that sells like this biometric ring kind of thing. They decided, well, we don't like the fact that you're using our name, even though they're completely different industries. So the company, like this company, the big company is based in Finland, and they have like a US presence. They want the smaller company that's in San Francisco that's been using it in connection with a completely separate product to change their name. So, I mean, it's the unfortunate thing is a lot of these, like we call it the David versus Goliath problem, because these larger companies, even though they're in the wrong, their goal is they're going to force you to change, even though they don't have a right to, but they're just going to, stand behind lawyers and like just make it expensive for companies that are like, I give up. I don't even want any part of this. So a lot of people have been able to use social media to help with these situations. I always caution my clients, like, before we go into social media, let's try to make sure that, this is our last route. But I mean, that's kind of how it's getting. Like, companies don't want to be embarrassed out there and, have all these comments on their,
Like
Twitter page.
To the small business.
Right.
And I always like that. I mean, then you at least got to have your stuff in order. You can't be like going argue with people and then you ain't doing that. So you got to at least have your stuff in order to do that.
You'd be surprised how many people are like, you're using my name. And I'm like, so when did you start? Last week. What?
Like, it's my stuff.
No, my client's been using it for 6 years. So good luck.
Yeah. So Brigitte, I know we were talking before this because we're seeing this a lot. And I think this is one of the big things. You create a business, especially if the business is you. So you are the brand of the business, you own it, you are the one that's keeping the lights on and all those kind of things. And just being in a situation that if you went away, so that is if you pass away, if you become disabled, you just sit in a coma for a few weeks, like whatever it might be, how do you protect what you've built, especially if your plan is to make it to that next generation?
Okay, so to start, I think I'm going to touch on two things. One, as a firm, we often cross categories and work together as a team. So this topic is actually something that Nikia and I work fairly closely on, business succession. It kind of starts with deciding what kind of business entity is a big concern for you. Then maybe a single member where it's just you running an LLC is not ideal. Maybe you want to hire people. Maybe you want to train up someone to be like your right-hand man, just in case, or person, 2023, right? Just in case something were to happen to you. Maybe you want to, if your goal is to be a corporation, maybe it's a little bit easier to do that type of succession planning and designate who would step in and fill those roles if you have officers and executives. Then there's the piece of if you really step away from the business or want to sell it, do you want to leave it to children? What if your children don't want to take on your business? That happens more often than we know. And than we think, that the child doesn't want to take on the family business. So what are your options then? There's also just, if you're in a partnership or you have multiple people in the business and something happens to you, how do you get bought out of that business? Does the business have to use a bunch of cash to buy you out so that you leave? Or if you are one of the owners who wants to buy somebody else out, there's ways we can plan for that and strategically put some things in place so that if that time comes, it's a smooth transaction. So the second thing I want to say is this comes back also to the contracts. When you're setting up a business, it's very easy to do it online to some extent. The Secretary of State, wherever, you can register an LLC real easily. The issue is the agreements and the documents behind it. The contract is what dictates how the relationship's going to go. And those have to be really strategically tailored and written to actually memorialize what you want. Oftentimes you can get a form offline, or you can get an operating agreement, but it's going to be real standard. Maybe it doesn't say that you want to be able to leave your interest to your adult child. Maybe it doesn't say that you want to be bought out all cash. Maybe it doesn't say, none of that is specified in those blanket templates. So that's where it's really important to put those things in place. And I think oftentimes those are the first questions we ask when we have clients, whether they come through me with estate planning as their most important priority because of something going on. They go to Nikia for an agreement and realize they have a lot of other things they want to discuss, or they go to Nicole for branding. It oftentimes ends up kind of touching us all to some extent. And it's because they overlap so much, and because we're often trying to figure out what's the big picture goal, because that will oftentimes dictate the decisions we're making, what we're putting in agreements, if you're hiring people or not, and how that looks as we're protecting it and growing it for the client, right? The client comes first. And then the last thing I was just going to touch on, which we've all kind of touched on, the reason why it's so important, and I know Nicole mentioned this and Nikia touched on it, attorneys, it's a cost, because yes, everybody's like, attorneys aren't cheap, but we're a wholly remote law firm. We try to be more reasonable with our fees, but we're also very necessary. The goal is that we can plan and put all these things in place so that if something happens, it saves you so much money in the long run. Because oftentimes, especially as a small business owner, you can't outcost the big companies. Like, it's so expensive to litigate. It's so expensive to die without an estate plan and be probated. It is expensive to respond to cease and desist letters or complaints or whatever the case may be for infringement against huge companies. Like, that's what's going to drain you. Like, the cost up front to get stuff protected will save you so much money in the long run. But I think we often live in this world where it's like, yeah, that's not going to happen. But it's like, but we know it happens all the time. That's why our court systems are so overloaded with litigation, because it happens all the time. And everybody's happy in the beginning. It's when things go south, when everything hits the fan. And we're always so thankful oftentimes, like when our clients have things in place, because we'd have to deal with that sometimes too. The client has a great relationship. They love this client of theirs, and then all of a sudden they're like, we don't want to work with them anymore. And we're like, well, good thing your agreement lets you walk away. We'll just send them a letter and we'll leave. But had they not had the agreement, I'm like, well, did you finish the services? Like, have they paid you money? It gets really complicated. So I don't know. That was a lot, I know, and it was kind of touched on it a little bit, but I think, yes, we can plan for businesses. Yes, we can plan for all these things, but it really starts with like coming back to the contracts, coming back to protecting, coming back to really setting good foundation to start, so that we're not having to try to retroactively fix things or defend ourselves without the proper things in place, just blindly trying to save ourselves in situations. So,
and I'll just piggyback off of that just really, really quickly, bringing it a little bit back to Nicole's main area. People forget about trademark or about their intellectual property and their content as part of their legacy. That's big. That's important. Who owns that trademark? Do you own it in your own name? Is it owned by the entity that you're running? And how is that going to be handled once you get to a position where your estate plan might kick in? So please don't forget to address that. And the very last thing that I was going to mention is, in a lot of states, do keep in mind that there are a lot of people who are solopreneurs, sole proprietors, or who have an LLC, but they're the only member, et cetera. And they basically say, oh, I don't need an operating agreement. It's just me. In many states, an LLC ceases to exist when a member leaves. And especially if that LLC only has one member, that person might not be able to pass on that LLC without having all of the documents lined up and saying what is supposed to happen. Will that LLC continue to exist if that person passes away? Or is it going to be dissolved by the state? Is it going to become part of the estate? Who knows? Unless you've got your operating agreement and your estate plan and everything says what it's supposed to say.
And I think that's a good point, because in today's day and age, especially, there are more people who are providing a service. There are more content creators, and so they are the business. But someone can still be making money off that. Your children can still eat off of, the course that you made, or, whether it be the art and so forth. I think that's really important. Tyra says research and fact finding is so important. And I think it's, just not even knowing where to start. And I think as a business owner, you're good at what you're good at. But sometimes business owners aren't good at the business part. And if they were, they would be helping business owners do what they're good at. And so I guess a question to ask to the ladies, if we're thinking about, okay, I have an idea today, or let's say not an idea today, because I'm sure some of the ladies, they already got idea, they doing some stuff, they make a little bit of money here and there. And so they're like, all right, so how do I make this legit? Who should they contact first? Because we got a budget. We got to figure out, okay, in the next 90 days, we're going to accomplish X. What should be kind of top priority, and then second and third?
That's a hard one. I'm going to go first.
Yeah. Right, all of us.
I'm going to go first. 4 people. And you need to do it all around the same time. And you probably shouldn't make any big decisions until you've spoken to all 4 of these people. So number 1, somebody who understands intellectual property. Number 1. Number 2, somebody who understands business taxes. Number 3, somebody who understands business liability. And then I said 4, and I forgot who the fourth one was. We're going to go with 3. So if I remember the 4th, I'll bring that back up. But the thing that a lot of people don't realize is that they might decide to go to one and not the other, but they're not getting the full picture. So if you go to a business law attorney about business registration, they might not tell you, ooh, you probably need to run a trademark search on this business name before you register it. If you go to a CPA and God bless them, they're going to tell you what's the best entity for you based solely on tax liability. They're not really going to be able to help you with, any of the other aspects of the business. So I would say try to have a consultation with people who can hit all 3 of those points before you make any huge decisions about your next step.
I think that's a really good point. Nicole was like, hold on. And so I will say, what is probably, as we're thinking about the different aspects, and we all know that you can Google contract for X or how do I trademark X? What's probably one of the top 1 or 2 things that people miss by using XYZ online, I can buy a document kind of thing. Nicole's about to roll out her chair. She's rolling.
Like Nikia and I talk about this almost all the time. I'm going to let her touch on the contract side. But for me on the trademark side, of course, it's with making sure that the name that you have picked is one that you can use. And even if you decide you're never going to register it, you still need to make sure that you're not going to have a target on your back. Like, why? Like you might be so fearful at the point where you're not even trying to tell people like, oh, that's the name of my business. So you're just like, oh, I can do that. And it's like, but what's the name of your business? Oh, don't worry about it. No, like no one should be living like that. So like the very least, as I mentioned earlier, make sure that the name you want to use is available. You can register your own trademark. I do not recommend it because, yes, the information is there available on the USPTO website. They do all these little boot camps and videos. Those are great. But once again, when you start doing the actual practical aspect, there are going to be things that you might not completely understand and they haven't clarified. And you probably need an attorney to kind of interpret it for you based on your specific situation. Like your trademark registration, like your actual trademark itself. Well, first of all, let's back up because I think there's also a misunderstanding that it's, a lot of places where you see people like, I can help you get a trademark. I can't help you get a trademark. They can't help you get a trademark because your trademark is yours because you are using it. That's a trademark. Like once you start using something in connection with sales and services, like the sale of goods and services, it is a trademark. What we can help you do is register it so that you have nationwide rights and ownership to it. So that's the number one lesson we're going to give, but so you have people, and it's attorneys do this too. They'll be like, oh, I can help you with trademarking. No, they can't. They can help you with registering. So if you're going on Google and you're seeing all these things and you're like, oh, I can do this. This seems simple. In some aspects it is. However, you need to make sure, as I was getting ready to say, that the entity that's using the trademark is the one that's listed as the owner. So, I know people are like, oh, I want to own it in my, as an individual. Are you a sole proprietor? Are you the one who's going to be offering these services? So you don't have a company? Oh, that's when you would be listed as an individual. But if you have a company, the company needs to be listed as the owner. Some other things are proof of use. Like this is something that I deal with daily with some of my clients. It's just proving how you're using your trademark in service, how you're using it with your goods. And every single time it's usually like, I can't submit that. Like we need to, I need to kind of review your website and make sure that what you're, saying that you're doing is what we're doing here. So that is one of the other reasons why people get refused. Like besides, likelihood of confusion with something else that's out there, also like not showing proof of use or like not trademark use, all these little things. So like there are little quirks in that application that seem so straightforward that are not necessarily straightforward. So yes, there's a lot of information on Google. The question is, do you understand it enough to know what's right and what's wrong?
And
Me. We talk about this so much, and this is going to sound, and I'm going to say it, but it's going to sound so self-centered. But I try to remind people, just remember that we all do what we do because it's part of our zone of genius. It's kind of like what we do. And so there are some nuances related to practicing law that you just really can't pick up. It's hard to just read a book. And now I know how to register these trademarks. I know how to write this will. I know how to write this contract. It comes from education, and it comes from on-the-job training. And I mentioned this to Nicole the other day. I don't know how it came to me, but I was like, legal writing a contract is technical writing. Anybody can sit down and write out a document that says, okay, when you turn 21, I'm going to give you my car. You can write a document that constitutes a contract, but if there's ever any sort of dispute, what's going to happen on the other side? What would a judge do? Have you addressed when the title is going to be turned over, what the payment plan is going to be? So what we do is very, very, very technical, and we make it look easy. Now, I'm being silly now, but it is very technical, and all of those entrepreneurs out there who might be listening, it's the same way that what you do is very, very special. Like you have spent years coming up with that configuration of the scents that you're going to use for that candle, for the mixture that you're creating a tea with, whatever it is that you're doing. You didn't just wake up one day basically and start selling it and it just automatically started flying off the shelves. It took time and it took preparation, and so it's the same with CPAs, attorneys, whoever your professional team may be. We have stuff to offer that you're just not going to get on YouTube.
I think too, just to piggyback on that, like really concretely, if you're looking at an agreement, like if you Google search LLC let's do an employment agreement. Nikia's favorite employment agreement. You might get a template online and you look at it and it's got all the clauses, services, hire date, whether you're going to offer sick leave pay, whatever. Yes, it looks great. But remember, you're signing that as well. And there's probably an indemnification clause. Do you even know what those mean? There's probably some type of a dispute resolution that might require specific arbitration or mediation. Do you know that there's different boards that do arbitration, that some are favorable, some are not? Like, as attorneys, we know, like, oh, we don't ever want to do that one because it's not ever going to be on our side as an employer. Like, those are the things we learn through our work, through our jobs. And that's part of why it's important to have someone look it over, because there's also, in what you think is boilerplate, there's one word in there that can change the whole trajectory in a dispute. Like, to say, like, you understand and agree and acknowledge means that you read it, you understood it, and you agree to it. So you are going to be, the court will make you stand by that. If it just says you agree, or no, if it just says you acknowledge, but doesn't show that you've understood it and you agree, like, those little nuances in languages and in words we choose makes a huge difference. And that's why it's necessary that you have an attorney going through it, or a contract attorney specifically, because there's no telling what's in that boilerplate template. And I will tell you, 99% of the time, even if we get a template from our legal database, we are tearing it apart to tweak it for the client specific needs, the state, the jurisdiction, whatever the case may be. But even a template drafted by an attorney and in the attorney's legal database is usually not even a valid template. So the Google search images is definitely not going to be. So just keep these things in mind, because, and we always talk about, like, would you go to would you, like, look at a YouTube video to, like, learn how to, like, cut something out of your arm? Like, no. Like, doctors go to trade school, med school to be doctors. We go to trade school, law school to be attorneys. Like, it's an analogy, right? It's the same, but for some reason I think it gets lost, because it seems like, oh yeah, we could just do that. But it's like, that's literally what we go to school for all those years.
And also, I think part of it is that with contracts, and I don't really get involved much in litigation as much these days. But what happens with contracts disputes is you don't even know that your contract is defective until 3, 4, 5 years down the road. And by that time, you've already used it with dozens, if not hundreds of people. And when you come to your attorney, it's basically triage. Like, we're trying to cut off the bleed, stop the bleed. We can write you a new one starting that day, but there's nothing we can do about all of those people who could come flooding in at you now that the deadline to file a lawsuit is approaching. All of those people are lining up trying to sue you about that contract that didn't have the right language or protects them more than it protects you. So,
and the bigger you get, the bigger the target on you.
Exactly.
Like Biggie said, right? More money, more
money, no
it's real. The bigger you grow, the more people will try to come after you. So,
and I think that's a good point. I mean, when you got more money, you probably won't have as many problems. You're like, yeah, I need a whole bunch of attorneys. But one question I'll say, or I'll ask, is, especially as we're looking at all these things. So, you're starting your business, you got your checklist. And, like Nicole said, you can go to all these places and they're like, oh, well, here's a webinar, all the things you need to get started. How many of these are one-timers versus, we know if you got a business, you got to register every year, all these kind of things. What are the one-timer versus the ongoing investments? So once you've trademarked, do you have to go back and update or, re-register? Or once you set up your estate plan, how often do you got to go back and take a look at that? What are some of those things as they build out their kind of ongoing budget?
So with the trademark, with registration, trademarks last forever as long as you're continuing to use them in what you applied for. So if you're not using that trademark anymore, then that registration is no longer valid, because it doesn't make sense for you to continue to, say that you have the ownership over this and you're not even using it anymore. Plus, the USPTO requires that you submit documentation every 10 years. Like, for the first time, it's going to be between the 5th and 6th year, but like every 10 years after that, where you're saying, we're still using this trademark and this is still how we're using it. So as long as you keep doing that, it could last forever. If you start making changes to it, then you're talking about possibly having to file new registrations. So it really kind of depends. Like, some people's businesses are growing where they're like, we're going to rebrand and change our name. And, again, starting the process from scratch at that point. But, you probably have more money and there's a bigger reason why you decided to, change your name and expand. But I'm trying to think if there was anything else along those lines. But I mean, yeah, so these are, again, the considerations to take. And then also, like, are you using other things to identify your business or your brand? Like, do you have a logo? Are you using a slogan, a tagline? Or are there certain colors that you have, which colors can be registered as trademarks? It's a little hard, but it can be done. Like, anything can be a trademark. Like, anything can serve as a brand identifier. Like, if it's people connected with you, it can be registered and protected. So I'm going to get off my soapbox on trademarks and let somebody else do it.
Any thoughts, ladies, about?
Do you want to go, Nikki?
One-time expenses. So
I was going to let you go, Sabrina.
Okay.
So estate planning is probably one of the more one-time bigger expenses to get it set up. Afterwards, though, yes, there is still some maintenance that needs to be done. For example, if you've changed a beneficiary that you have for a trust, or for like my high net worth tax planning, maybe they have a new asset and we're going to strategically figure out how to move it into a trust to try to mitigate some taxes, or you have a charitable function now that you want to start planning for, or, you know, you want to change who your power of attorney is or who you've designated on a POA or something like that. So yes, there is some ongoing things, but really there's the main setup. And then it's usually either like every 6 months or annual check-in where I'm just like, hey, anything new going on? If you get married or divorced, if you marry into a blended family, or somehow there's additional children that you want to include that wouldn't be blood related in a certain, you know, oftentimes we dropped it to include all like adopted children, but not always blended. So there's things like that. So yes, it is ongoing. It's not as ongoing and heavy lifting as some of the other areas of law, but generally for businesses, there's, you know, the startup expenses are usually the most because we're getting everything put in place. The foundation is getting set. But, you know, even like in employment, I'll let Nikia go on to that. But like, yes, getting the full employment process set up, big expense. But then now you only have to change it if you're hiring an employee. Like maybe it's like getting one agreement done to hire that employee. Most of the heavy lifting's done, but it's still going to be ongoing. You're expanding into a different market. You've decided you want to change your entity structure. You have an investor, so you're issuing some shares to a venture capitalist, or whatever the case may be. Like those things come up. So it is a little bit ongoing. But like your CPA, taxes are due every year. You have to have your attorney helping you as you're moving through things. Like we're helping you with the operation of the business. And we like to be involved in it every step of the way, because that's how we're going to mitigate risk and prevent, hopefully, problems down the road. It's much easier, like Nikia said, to plan for it than to triage it. That is like, no one likes to be an ER doctor, right? Where we're just like, stop the bleeding. Like that's stressful. So that's what we're trying to avoid.
Cost exponentially more.
Oh, it's way more.
What if we're in triage and we're trying to help fix a problem that's already happened? It's just going to cost you more later than it would have cost for us to help you prevent the problem from the beginning.
Because at that point, yeah, we're fixing it and setting it up for the future.
Exactly.
And it's urgent now.
Right.
So now it's like we're moving things on calendars to like this has become the main issue right now. So that all of those factors kind of play into that. Okay.
And in terms of, you know, the business management and operations and contracts and all of that, like Sabrina said, it does oftentimes take a little bit of time and a little bit of an investment to lay the foundation. But you know, for the most part, you're going to want to have your contracts reviewed, revised, whatever, whenever you're starting something new. If you've got a new product, new service, whatever it is, you're going to want to have a review based on that. Whenever you're making a significant change to whatever it is that you were doing in the past. And this can include if you're hiring a new employee for the same role, but they're in a different state. That contract needs to be reviewed for compliance with the new state. And also to confirm that you're doing things right, that you're actually in compliance. And I say that because the law sometimes just changes on us without much notice. And so that's why it's really, really helpful. There are a lot of people who say, I would like to have a business attorney on retainer to be able to, reach out and have those conversations and just, check in and get some strategy. And that can be very, very helpful, because even the attorney who, even if you had an attorney draft your agreements for you, and then the relationship just ended, you went your way, they went their way, under most circumstances, that attorney has absolutely no obligation to reach out to you and tell you, you know what, that law is changing in October. You need to have that reviewed. And so that's one of the benefits of having an ongoing relationship with an attorney, because they've got you on their list of people to update and basically say, you need to send that back to me. Don't use it past this date, or, however that works. But if you don't have that ongoing relationship, it can be a little bit like the Wild Wild West, because I mean, you're going to hear about some of the big cases in the news that create some sort of big ripple effect, things that everybody hear about, but those are rare. A lot of the changes just aren't being published like that. So it does oftentimes take a relationship with an attorney to say, this is what's going to be the law as of January 1st.
I think that's a good point. And Tanisha, tell me if I said the name wrong. She asked, is there a link to your information? So I do have the Connect link. I just dropped that into the chat for your website. But I think one of the things too, I always say, I know on your website it is if you want to chat with us, but what do they need to provide so that meeting is worthwhile? They can't just click it and be like, let's chat tomorrow. And when you get on the call, they're like, listen, I don't know. I just need you to fix my life. just fix me. Thank you, girl. Thank you. And so if they're saying, all right, I know my stuff out of whack, I just started, I was trying to make some extra money. For whatever reason, they're like, I'm trying to put some stuff together. What should they bring to make that initial conversation as valuable as possible?
It depends on where they're starting. So some people reach out because they already have something in mind. They're thinking, I need to register this trademark. And then it's not until they have a conversation with Nicole that Nicole's like, you might need a few more things. Let me give you a short list. But each of us, because we sort of have our main area, we have overlap in certain ways, and we do our practice areas complement each other. But each of us sort of has our own intake process based on what it is that person is looking for. And then it's kind of like, once they become our client, they're our client. Like they may not meet me for 6 months, but once contracts pop up, they're my client too. Right. So it really, really depends on what their entry point is. And Nicole's got this whole little questionnaire. You ain't even got to worry. She's going to ask you the questions that she needs to know.
Right.
I would say, like, if you're just doing the contact form, what is it? Like the state you're located,
name, email, state,
and maybe like what you think is priority. Mm-hmm. And then one of us will field that based on those answers. And then we can go from there on, I would say from that first call, depending on where you're coming in at, knowing what you think is your biggest priorities, like having those listed. What are your biggest sore spots of what you think needs to be done, or your biggest concerns? That's always the best way to start. Like, what are you most worried about? And then that's where we can try to focus. But we might actually issue spot and say, actually, this is more concerning to us. So let's start here. Right. That's our job, right? That's literally what attorneys do. Everybody's like, you're always giving us bad news. I'm like, well, that's our job. We literally went to school for 3 years to learn how to issue spot, exactly. to find problems before they become a problem. So in any event, I would say, like, just knowing what are your biggest concerns. We always need to know what state you're in, so that we know which of us should handle it initially, even though all of us will probably touch a case once it's in at some point, potentially. Right. Not always, but.
And one question I'll also ask, so when we talk about you're doing business today in the state that you live, so if you're doing business in Georgia or California or wherever it is, and then you get a client that calls and says, actually, can you ship this cake to another state? Does that change things? Or is it all of a sudden a different world as you say, yeah, girl, I can ship this cake to, Maine. Does that change things from a contract perspective to even just protecting your intellectual rights? So maybe you're doing a class that you do locally and someone's like, do you mind coming over to, Georgia to doing this class? And you're like, yeah. And then you didn't realize, wait a minute, that maybe I need to do a couple steps. Are there any of those things, especially in the expansion phase? I think when you're getting started, there's the excitement and there's the stress of getting everything in place. But then as you grow, you're excited about that next big opportunity. And you don't think, wait, I just crossed over into a different state. Are those some things that people should think about and say, wait, before I do this, let me call somebody?
Yeah. I mean, I think especially like with certain products over services, well, also services. So like if you're a licensed therapist or dentist in Florida, I don't know how Alabama will feel if you decide you're going to go step up there and start doing some work and you haven't gone through the proper licensing process. But then there are also like certain businesses that are legal in some states that are not legal in other. And I'm talking about cannabis businesses where like, of course, Colorado, California, DC, it's legal, to sell products that have CBD oil or THC. However, there are other states where if you were to cross the line, your business is no longer legal. And the other issue with that also is because it's not legal in certain states, the federal government doesn't recognize it. So those are the things like if you are going to be moving to a different state, you need to contact it doesn't even necessarily have to be us because one, I can't handle cannabis because my state doesn't recognize it except for medicinal purposes. So I can't even touch those types of applications. But this is where I say like you should definitely connect with an attorney in that state that you might want to consider pushing your services or your goods in and making sure that what you're doing is considered legal there and like what you need to do to become legal. And it should also be an attorney who's focused on that area. So like you're not going to go a family law attorney to help you with, you're setting up your dental practice. And I see this a lot because people are like, oh, I decided to have my friend's attorney do this trademark application. I was like, oh, so is your friend's attorney like a trademark attorney? No, he does criminal work. What the?
He just that was a side hustle.
I'm not, look, you will not see me at Tulane and Broad trying to do anybody's arraignment for criminal. Like, I know my boundaries, and that's not it. You will probably end up in jail for the night because I don't even know what to say other than please plead not guilty, even though you might be, I don't know. Like,
no contest.
Right. Like, I don't know what you should be doing. Like, I hope they said bail. I don't know.
Yeah, I would jump on that too from the business and the tax standpoint. You need to keep in mind, sales taxes vary in different states, when and how they're assessed. If you're shipping products in that sense. Also, there's just entity registrations in general. So are you creating enough of a presence in that other state to trigger the need to register an entity in that state? And I can give you, like, for an example, I mentioned I'm licensed in California. I can only service clients in California unless it's a federal tax situation, but I live in Nevada. So I have to report all of my California income and pay taxes to California, even though I live in a no income tax state and I earned the income from Nevada. It doesn't matter. We have to have an entity in California. The firm is registered in every state where we practice and live because we have to have that there because we're servicing clients there. So those are things to think about. And that is part of what the attorney helps you through when you think about registering your business. Like maybe you do live in Georgia, but the majority of your services are remote or in another state frequently. Then maybe you don't need to register your entity in Georgia. Maybe there's a better state to register it. So that analysis is part of what the attorney does, other than just registering the entity because that's the state you live in. Like sometimes there is reasons to strategically pick different states for entity registration. Sometimes there are not. Like everybody doesn't need a Delaware corporation, regardless of what people say. Everybody doesn't need an LLC.
Or right.
So it really is an analysis to determine what are your goals, what's the best option, what's the growth projection for the business, where do you plan on operating, what kind of services or goods you're providing. All those things come and play into effect. Are you already making a ton of money? Are you a two-parent house or a two-person household in the highest tax bracket? Then maybe you don't want an LLC. Like there's factors that come into play when you're just making these decisions. So that I would just touch on that part, because as the tax person, that's where I'm coming in. Like, I don't know if you want to do that, and then for contracts, yeah, I mean, know that business law is about protecting consumers a lot of times and employees. So.
100%. 100%. And I, slight deviation from what we were saying, really try to keep in mind that the US is kind of weird compared to a lot of other countries in that we've got like federal law, but then each state has its own law. And there could be conflict and which one applies at what point. We don't even always know. like it's an analysis. It requires figuring it out. So like I said, this is a slight deviation from the question, but my whole point in saying this is, whatever it is that you're doing or want to do is going to be based on your specific facts and circumstances. It's not going to be based on, some just general broad rule. It's going to be based on all of your facts. Like, should you register an LLC or corporation? That literally depends on you and what you're going to be doing. And, should you have, will you need to register in multiple states? That's going to depend on all of those states, because every state kind of has its own analysis of what's sufficient to require you to have to register there or do something in that particular state. So it's not there. There are a whole lot of broad, sweeping, general rules, but when it really boils down to protecting your specific interests, there's specific analysis that applies just to you. So it's going to be different from what your friend did and different from what your mama did. It's going to apply just to you. And it's a fact-finding analysis.
I think that's a really good point and a really good segue. I know we're right at the hour mark, because since it's very specific, we hear all the stuff on social media and people are then like, oh, well, okay, I got to get an LLC so I can write everything off. I got to do this so I can do this. And so I guess to even close us out, if you have any other questions, be sure to drop those in the chat. But what are some of the things that you want people to say, okay, when I walk away from here, I am going to shore up my business for the future with 1 or 2 steps in the next 6 months or what have you?
Make sure that you have a trademark that you can own and use. If you get a logo designed by an artist, make sure that you also own that logo. And not just paying the invoice for the artist does not necessarily mean you own it. It actually is, it has to be turned over in a written document. I know Nakia is going to probably touch on this, but contracts are extremely important in all aspects. Like, I am currently dealing with, I'm not even going to say, but like, let's say hypothetically client approached artist and artist did work for client's products. And now there's a dispute and there's no agreement. So, currently dealing with trying to figure out what this agreement should have been and what we need to do to fix it so that these people still remain somewhat cordial, even though they're probably never doing business again together.
You never want to talk to them again, but let's just walk away in a nice way.
Right. I would say if you are, as you're moving through your business process and you feel those little like, I wonder, or I have a question, or I'm not sure, I would invest in reaching out to someone who knows, right? Like we only know what we know. And Google and Instagram, and yes, like I know it's been said a lot, like there's an overwhelming amount of information out there, but it is not all good information. And it's like, we're attorneys. I'm a tax attorney. And secretly, Nicole has a CPA license, and we don't do our own taxes. We don't touch it with a 10-foot pole. We hire a CPA to do that. And like, it's like, yeah, we're business attorneys. We should be able to do that. And we're tax attorneys, but we still don't do it because it's not what we do every day. We're not well versed in it every single day. We're not really in the weeds with that. So we like leave it to the professionals. And I think there's something to be said about just ask the source. When in doubt, just ask the source instead of trying to find the answers. Because law is confusing. It's a lot. There's always a nuance, a caveat, some exception. And you don't know what you don't know, and you don't know what to look for when you don't know. So it's just ask the minds that were trained to think like crazy analytical people, because that's what we're here to do. And we want to be able to help people. We want to help you grow and sustain and make your business as successful as you want it to be, and leave it to the next generation and uplift our communities. And we can't do that if we're self-sabotaging by constantly just, thinking we can do it. I know that's how we can often be like, oh my God, I can do it myself. I'm just going to work hard. But you don't want to work hard and then lose it all for something that could have cost you $300, like an hour phone call,
That's huge.
So
yeah,
that's
and
what I would say.
People are scared of the cost. Like you hear attorney and you'd be like, listen, I ain't got 2 commas. I just barely.
But I say it really all boils down to do your best to invest in your future.
Mm-hmm.
And the future of your bloodline, the people that you care about. We people who look like me and I grew up in Alabama, and I come from a long line of educators who like invented stuff, who did a whole bunch of things that family could be rich off of, had they done things a little bit differently. Like we could have had a bunch of books out there, a whole bunch of things. And so people who look like me, who look like women on this screen, we're kind of playing catch up, not because we haven't had not because we haven't had the capacity to do things, but because we haven't had the same opportunities as a whole lot of other people, and because we've had to figure out how to do things behind the scenes, and on a shoestring budget, and with everything in our face, and trying to every obstacle in its way to prevent us from being able to do those things. And so of course we've got a long way to go. There's a whole lot more that could happen, but it starts somewhere. And if you're out there, running a business, your best options are to do it like the big dogs do it, because otherwise we find ourselves in these cycles of, losing the business, losing the house, losing, this and that, because we're trying to write our own contracts and write our own will, and, all of those types of things. And then you get to court, and even the judges are kind of like, I wish I could help you, but my hands are tied.
Because remember, the laws apply to a business, no matter if you're a single member LLC who has not sold $1 or made $1 versus, right. Apple, your S&P 500, Silicon Valley companies.
Right.
The laws that apply to businesses apply to them all equally.
It applies
equally.
I
think we think like, oh, it's a small business. Same.
Oh, the law's gonna let me slide because I'm not really making that much money, and that's not really how it works. That's how businesses go bankrupt, and the business owner leaves debt for their loved ones. So invest in yourself, invest in your success, invest in your future.
Because one of the other things, and something you said, Nakia, kind of hit on this point for me, is if you don't really know what you're doing and you're kind of going about it like, I'm going to look at this YouTube video or I'm going to do this, like again, number one, we don't even know what these people's experience are or what their education is. But if you decided to, form that LLC because somebody told you to form it, however, you're not running it the way that you're supposed to. You're not taking advantage of that limited liability that company offers you because you're commingling your funds or you're paying bills using your personal account, or you're doing all these kinds of things where you no longer are a separate entity. Then, you've lost that liability. And if a customer sues you, you could lose your house. Like this is how serious it can be.
And they're coming after your house, your car, your Christmas tree, and every gift under it.
Right.
Every single thing, like for real. The whole purpose of having like a limited liability company or corporation is to create two separate people in the eyes of the law. And if you, the person, are basically using that other person, using that business as it's just like an extension of you. I'm using my company email and putting it on my kids' call list at school. I use it for my personal Amazon or those types of things. All those little things play into who are you and who is that business. And at the end, if there's ever a dispute and the law says y'all both the same person, then everything you own gets tied up into everything that business owns. And so that's your house, that's your car, that's your bank account, all of that.
So one thing I will say about email, you all, we can't keep using Gmail accounts for business. We can't. Gmail actually has a way for you to set up a business domain and use that for your email. It's 2023, y'all. We're growing.
Small investments.
Like start there.
And I think that's a good point. It's like little things. And I'm quite sure you all have done some business with somebody, and then all of a sudden you see that Gmail, you'd be like,
yeah,
it makes it real.
Yeah, it makes me itch.
I'm not gonna do anything bigger now. Like right. I'm just, this was enough. I'm gonna stop here.
Right. It's like, can we take that extra step? Like, I'm sure when you got that website domain, it probably came with a way for you to set up an email. Can you just do
a little?
Okay, and respectfully, it's even worse if we talk in AOL. If you got that AOL or that Hotmail email address, please don't. Please, like we be about your business. You want to be legit. Be legit. And make sure that anybody who looks at your records, anybody who looks at your website, even an email from you, can tell that you are a legit business and that you are running a business that's separate from you. Put that email footer put that footer in your email. Get you a real logo. Make sure you get the rights to that logo.
Right.
Do what you need to make sure that you are presenting yourself in the best light. So that not only are people taking you seriously, but all of that goes towards limiting your personal liability.
Right.
I think that's a really good point. I think that's a great place to even end, because it's small things that you can do. So one thing y'all can do by the end of this week is get rid of your Gmail. People going to assume that you are probably a little older than you are if you got the AOL.
I mean, my sister still has AOL, like that is her main email. And I was like, sweetie, we've been using that like since we were pre-college. Like we set up an AOL account when we were.
I can't even imagine how much junk she gets too. Like think about all the junk mail from decades ago.
Yeah. Like I just laugh at her because I'm like, oh God, I have to use that AOL account again.
I don't even feel like it's secure. It's like,
yeah. I mean, and it's like, I can't speak on Gmail, but I can. Setting up a business account gives you also more security than an actual personal email account. So that's also the other thing. Like you're dealing with customers, they're probably sending payment information to you or however. You cannot rely on using a personal account for that.
Yes, yeah. Don't do that.
and one last thing, and then I'll let it go. This is the former litigator in me. Please be very, very careful about commingling. If you are using one email account, basically for all of your business as well as all your personal affairs, just do know if you're ever involved in litigation, if you were up against an attorney like I used to be, I'm getting my hands on all of your email.
Yep.
I'm gonna see.
Talking about, your mom cake dry and all
I'm
that
gonna
stuff.
see you. I'm gonna see everything that you ordered using that email, and I'm gonna use it against you. I'm gonna see those personal love notes to whoever you are, sending those types of emails to, any accounts that are attached to that email, and you're getting, any sort of monthly invoices or anything like that. It's going to be disclosed because you're using that email as both a business email address and a personal email address, and that's just going to put all your business out there. In addition to putting your business out there, and it becomes part of the court record, but then it's used against you to basically say you and your business are not two separate people. You're the same person, and so we might have sued the business, but now you are personally liable because you didn't create a separation between you and the business. So
I love that. Tyra says it's her first time viewing. She subscribed a while ago and just turned on your notifications last week. And so she said, this is awesome information. Thank you, Tyra, for joining us. And really, that's our whole goal, is to provide you useful information on your own individual journey, because it's going to look different. Some people only want their small business, something they can do to supplement their income, and that's fine. Set it up and protect it and let that be that. And some people are building an empire. And if you're doing that, we still want you to be able to set it up. And we'd love for you to be able to work with other Black women who can understand where you're going. We talked about some nuances in our lives and the way that we communicate and things that are most important and so forth. And so be sure, I dropped the link. Let me see if I can throw the link in here again so you all can reach out and have that initial conversation and talk about where you are, where you're going, what kind of help you can get. And we would love to see you next week for another great Money Monday. Thank you, Nakia. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, Sabrina. And be sure to reach out. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.